Thank you very much. Well, Buddhism, as we know, it started with Siddhartha Gautama, who came to be known as the Buddha. And the word Buddha means enlightened. The Voice of the Silence by HP Blavatsky says, "Look inward, thou art Buddha." It means that we are all Buddha or enlightened. We just have to wake up and realize it. Plato stated that all learning is merely recollection. All true learning is merely recollection. It's an awakening to who and what we really are. Siddhartha was born approximately 2,500 years ago in Nepal. Many people tend to think it was in India, but I researched it. It was in Nepal. It was just over the border. He was born into a life of luxury as a prince. His father was King Suddhodana, and his mother was Queen Maya. He grew up in India, which at the time was dominated by the Hindu religion. He had many Hindu beliefs, including the idea of samsara, the wheel of life, which was a basic Hindu teaching, also reincarnation and karma. But Hinduism had a strict caste system as well, and Buddhism teaches the equality of all beings. According to legends, Queen Maya had a dream in which she learned she would give birth to a child who would be holy, a holy being. He was given the name Siddhartha because it means perfect fulfillment. After Siddhartha was born, a prophecy foretold that he would be a great ruler or a holy man. His mother died shortly after his birth, and the king wanted him to be a great ruler rather than a holy man. So he shielded his son from seeing any pain or suffering. Siddhartha lived a life of luxury in a palace. The king made sure his son had everything in the palace, so he wouldn't want to leave and wouldn't question anything. But Siddhartha grew up to be a caring and a kind person. When he was 16 years old, he married his cousin Yasodhara and had a son, Rahula. Siddhartha wondered about the world around him and wanted to see what was outside the palace. With his chariot driver Chanha, he left the palace secretly on a trip to the city and saw has become to be known as the Four Sights. Siddhartha saw four things he had never seen before. He was disturbed and didn't really understand what he was seeing. The first sight was an old man. Siddhartha had never seen anyone old before and questioned his chariot driver Chanha about what he was looking at. Chanha explained that when people get older, they physically decline. The second sight was illness. When Siddhartha saw an ill person by the side of the road, he was upset, as he had never seen anyone who was ill before. Chanha explained that during their lives, people do get ill. The third sight was a dead person being carried. Chanha explained that everyone dies eventually. The fourth sight was a holy man walking through the street. This person made Siddhartha curious, as the holy man looked calm and serene. Siddhartha wanted to find out about why people suffer and how it might be possible to end this suffering. He decided that he would leave the palace and his family behind to go out into the world to try to find some answers. He gave up all his possessions and luxurious lifestyle to try to understand more about suffering. It always seemed strange to me that he would leave his family, abandon his wife and child, but of course they were fully protected and taken care of, and later both became his followers. He spent some time as an ascetic, living a harsh life in the forest, but then realised that it was not the way. It was just as harmful to true spiritual progress as living a life of luxury. So he decided on the middle way between and above the two, and devised the Four Noble Truths. First, there is suffering. There's a cause of suffering. There's an end to suffering. And the fourth, the way out, is the Eightfold Path. right view, right intention, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So now a little bit about how Theosophy is related to Buddhism. In Gal, Sri Lanka, on May 25th, 1880, HP Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott took counsel. That is, they were formally acknowledged as Buddhists. In his old diary leaves, volume 2, Colonel Olcott writes that we had previously declared ourselves to be Buddhists, long before in America, both privately and publicly, so that this was but a formal confirmation of our previous professions. Later on, he adds, I can say that if Buddhism contained a single doctrine that we were compelled to accept, we would not have taken counsel. Our Buddhism was that of the master adept Gautama Buddha, which was identical with the wisdom religion of the Aryan Upanishads and the soul of all the ancient world faiths. In 1880, Olcott began to build up the Buddhist educational movement in Sri Lanka. In 1880, there were only 2 schools in Sri Lanka managed by the Buddhists. Due to the efforts of Olcott, the number rose to 205 schools and 4 colleges in 1907. Olcott also represented the Buddhist cause to the British government and found redress for the restrictions imposed against Buddhists, such as the prohibition of processions, Buddhist schools. He contributed to the improved financial administration of temple properties, and so on. Olcott united the sects of Sri Lanka in the Buddhist section of the Theosophical Society in 1880. Also, the 12 sects of Japan into a joint committee for the promotion of Buddhism in 1889. Myanmar, Thailand, and Sri Lanka emerged into a convention of Southern Buddhists in 1891. And finally, Northern and Southern Buddhism through joint signatures to his 14 propositions of Buddhism in 1891. Olcott also helped in the design of the Buddhist flag and wrote the Buddhist Catechism. So what an amazing amount of work he did, and most of it I didn't know about until I started researching for this talk. So why did HPB and Colonel Olcott proclaim themselves to be Buddhists? To understand this, we have to look at the Theosophical masters who gave us the teachings. In the Mahatma letters to AP Synod, Master KH says that the chiefs want a brotherhood of humanity, a real universal fraternity started. They had on several occasions proclaimed themselves to be followers of the Buddha. One of the chiefs just mentioned, known to us as the Mahachohan, stated in a letter that we, the devoted followers of that spirit incarnate of absolute self-sacrifice, of philanthropy, divine kindness, as of all the highest virtues attainable on this earth of sorrow, the man of men, Gautama Buddha, should ever allow the Theosophical Society to represent the embodiment of selfishness, the refuge of the few, with no thought in them for the many, is a strange idea, my brothers. So Gautama Buddha was born around 621 BC and was just one in a long line of Buddhas. He was part of a spiritual lineage going back millions of years. So you mustn't think of the Buddha as an isolated individual, but one of a long line of Buddhas appearing at certain times in our history. It is clear that the Theosophical Society was started in one of its ways to continue the work of the Buddha, in the sense that it is to follow the path of compassion that the Buddha taught. That's why they wanted a brotherhood of humanity. Very little was understood during HP Blavatsky's life regarding Buddhism. Now times have changed, and there are many more Buddhist scriptures translated by actual practitioners, not just intellectuals as they were in Victorian times. They were like the Orientalists and who didn't really have a belief or a following of Buddhism. They just did it in a kind of dead letter way. And the translations are much more accurate and infused with spirit. The only book at that time that contained such a spirit was The Voice of the Silence by HP Blavatsky. or translated by HP Blavatsky. This book introduced the concept of the Bodhisattva to the West and taught the path of compassion and the means to reach it by following the paramita path. And this was nothing new, of course. It had been known in the East for centuries. But H.P. Blavatsky was one of the first people to bring it to the attention of the West, if not actually the first. Zen Buddhism scholar D.T. Suzuki, who I like a lot, wrote about the voice of the silence. He said that it was undoubtedly Madame Blavatsky had in some ways been initiated into the deeper side of Mahayana teaching and then gave out what she deemed wise to the Western world. He also commented, "Here is the real Mahayana Buddhism." In 1927, the staff of the 9th Panchen Lama helped Theosophists put out the Peking edition of The Voice of the Silence. And I think another person who was involved in that was Alice Leighton Cleaver, who was one of H.P. Blavatsky's inner group. The 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, wrote in the preface to the 1989 centenary edition of The Voice of the Silence, "I believe that this book has strongly influenced many sincere seekers and aspirants to the wisdom and compassion of the Bodhisattva path." And in 1924, a prominent theosophist of the time, Christmas Humphreys, founded the Buddhist Society in London. It's still going, I think. So it is accepted that the paramita path is the one followed by those who wish to tread the Bodhisattva path of compassion, in contrast to the self-centered Pratyeka Buddha path. These paramitas are listed in The Voice of the Silence as Dana, the key of charity and love immortal; Shila, the key of harmony in word and act, the key that counterbalances the cause and the effect and leaves no further room for karmic action; Kashanti, patience sweet that naught can ruffle; Virag, indifference to pleasure and to pain, illusion conquered, truth alone perceived; Virya, the dauntless energy that fights its way to the supernal truth out of the mire of lies terrestrial; Dhyana, whose golden gate once opened leads the Najal, or the holy man, towards the realm of Sat Eternal and its ceaseless contemplation; and Prajna, the key to which makes of a man a god, creating him a bodhisattva, the son of the jhanis. And there's a book called The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. This is a very in-depth explanation of how we should live the compassionate life by looking at the 6 paramitas of perfection in order. In this, it is said that we should even be careful not to slam doors or move furniture heavily or raise our voice for any reason whatsoever. It's quite interesting. It's having on the surface, this may seem very trivial compared with many other things he says in the book, but in fact, it is showing respect for life on all levels of being and the development of the awareness of the feelings of others and how even such simple acts can affect them. So I remember this tale in Zen Buddhism about I think it was a pupil of one of the Zen masters who were coming for instruction, and it was raining outside. And the Zen master said to him when he walked in, "Which side of the door did you leave your umbrella on?" And the student said, "Well, I can't remember." And he sent him away. He said, "Well, come back when you've gained understanding on all levels that you, even something as trivial as that, you can remember." So it's interesting. Our words also should be gentle and helpful to show how essential it is to be mindful of even trivial things. We have to have this mindfulness. The real essence of Buddhist teaching is beyond words and images. If you read scriptures such as the Diamond Sutra or the Heart Sutra, this becomes very clear. In Zen, there are what are known as koans. These are riddles or sayings that cannot be solved using the logical mind. They are meant to show that the lower mind is inadequate to experience true spirituality. So we need to go beyond. Like what is the sound of one hand clapping? These kind of things. They have no logical explanation to them. You just have to go beyond. Some students were given koans to work on, and sometimes it took them months or even years, and eventually they broke through. It was very much something that was relevant for the time, for that particular time, because people's minds were a lot more open. They weren't clogged with too much book learning, with TV, with internet and all this. It was just something they totally concentrated their time on 24/7. In The Voice of the Silence, it states that the mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer. Meaning that the intellectual mind will kill out the spontaneous realization of the truth. But even the truth is just a conceptual view. If I can remember, this isn't written down, but I think Sakya Ditya or something is relative truth and Paramata Satya is ultimate truth, something like that. If I'm wrong, somebody will correct me afterwards, I'm pretty sure. A famous story is told about the Buddha. When Buddha was on Vulture Peak, he twirled a flower before the assembly. Everyone was silent. Only Mahakasyapa smiled. Buddha said, I have the eye of the treasury of the true teaching, the heart of nirvana, the true form of no form, and the ineffable gate of Dharma. It is a special transmission outside the teaching. I now entrust it to Mahakasyapa. So Mahakasyapa was one of the Buddha's chief disciples, and he was the only one that got the message intuitively. This is an idea very much in tune with Zen Buddhist teaching. And the word Zen means the same as the Sanskrit word dhyana and the Chinese word Chan, all meaning simply meditation. There's Chan Buddhism in China. And it was brought to, I'm just looking at what I might have written later on. Yeah, it was introduced into China by Bodhidharma, who I'll mention later. It is said that all the Buddha's teachings are both exoteric and esoteric, depending upon the consciousness of the one who is studying them. The same can be applied to Theosophical teachings, too. We only understand according to our level of consciousness. So in a way, the esoteric teaching is hidden in plain sight. Even the Theosophical masters say that most, if not all of their teachings are incommunicable until we reach a certain level of consciousness to understand them. And the Voice of the Silence says, the two schools of Buddha's doctrine, the esoteric and the exoteric, are respectively called the heart and the eye doctrine. Bodhidharma called them in China, from whence the names reach Tibet, the Tsungmen, or the esoteric, and the Kiaomen, exoteric school. It is so named because it is the teaching which emanated from Gautama Buddha's heart, whereas the eye doctrine was the work of his head or his brain. The heart doctrine is also called the seal of truth, or the true seal, a symbol found on the heading of almost all esoteric works. This seal of the heart was passed on from teacher to teacher. As in all things, the true esoteric teaching can never be put into words. We have to find it in our very own hearts. Words are just pointers. They're essential at times. It's like when you walk over the moors, when you're going for a walk and you're heading for a certain place. Let's say you're in Derbyshire and you're heading for Buxton. You need signposts to point the way, otherwise you'd go in completely the wrong direction, you'd end up somewhere else. But you have to do the walking for yourself. So there has to be signposts and pointers. But we have to do the work, we have to do the walking. One of my favourite Buddhist scriptures is the Lotus Sutra. It's mainly about the Buddha predicting that his disciples will attain Buddhahood and stating what their names will be when they reach this state. It is a way of saying that we all have this Buddha nature or Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness or the Tao or whatever ultimately we want to call it. In the end, all names just fade away. There's a poem that I like that says, "For what we will become, there is no name." It's also one of the first sutras that predict Buddhahood for female disciples, as up until then, Buddhism had been rather patriarchal. The outer frame doesn't matter. We all have the same life force, the same consciousness, the same spirit. So if on this planet we need to love each other, and we do need to, we have to start seeing ourselves as spiritual beings, sharing the same consciousness as each other and all the other kingdoms of nature, elementals, minerals, plants, animals, and into the deva or angelic realms of being. I always like Ram Dass's saying that we are just walking each other home. And I like that. I have an image of us on a path all holding hands, walking each other home. It's rather nice. It's a simple idea, but it's also a very potent one, very profound one. Politics, religion, philosophy all tend to promote separateness in general. We need to come together beyond all this as truly human beings, not ruled just by animalistic instincts, but by a divine inspiration. Of course, we have to live in the world, but need to get our priorities right. Too much intellectuality will block out the light of the spirit. It will make the person seem very erudite. But the fact is that it is only beyond the intellect that truth can be realized by direct experience. It's like the Buddhist teaching of the raft. You need a raft to cross the river, but once on the other side, you need to leave it behind, as it will just become a burden. So the raft can be said to be the intellect, essential for a while, but eventually to be left behind. It is written in the Diamond Sutra, "Thus shall ye think of this fleeting world, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom and a dream." I love that. Thus shall ye think of this fleeting world, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom and a dream. And the Buddha, Zen always said that life is like looking through a hole in a wall and seeing a horse galloping past. Just that instant it passes that hole. That's what life is, if you look at it in perspective to the universe or time itself. It's rather beautiful. So to try to look at things in perspective is very important. When we look at others, we need to try to develop the eye of love, to see beyond the outer mask and realise that inwardly we are all just the same. It's not easy, given the state of the world at the moment and the attempts to divide us all and to turn us into Cains and Abels. But to those who are awake or awakening, it is a practice that should be attempted, as it is a way to purify the mind and to develop clear vision and to see humanity as it truly is. I think it was Pythagoras who said, "Take heart, for the race of man is divine." And HPB said, "So we should never despair of humanity." So see humanity as it truly is, instead of how we have been indoctrinated sometimes to see it. It is a beautiful world if we can but just raise ourselves above the materialistic emanations of society based upon misconceptions of what it is to be truly human and a complete unawareness of human solidarity. Gautama Buddha was inspired by compassion for suffering humanity, and that was his guiding light in giving out the teachings. If you look at them as exoteric teachings, they seem rather dry sometimes and intellectual, but if we can get to the essence, then they become illuminated. HPB again writes, every human being is born with a rudiment of the inner sense called intuition, which may be developed into what the Scottish know as second sight. All the great philosophers who, like Plotinus, Porphyry, and Iamblichus, employed this faculty, taught the doctrine. There's a faculty of the human mind, writes Iamblichus, which is superior to all which is born or begotten. Through it, we are enabled to attain union with the superior intelligences, to being transported beyond the scenes of this world and to partaking the higher life and peculiar powers of the heavenly ones. Rather beautiful. And the Iamblichus and Porphyry and Plotinus were all members of the Neoplatonists, who were a former incarnation of Theosophy in the early days of the first centuries CE or AD, or whatever you want to call it. Goes on to say, were there no inner sight or intuition, the Jews would never have had their Bible, nor the Christians Jesus. What both Moses and Jesus gave to the world was the fruit of their intuition or illumination. What the subsequent elders and teachers allowed the world to understand was dogmatic misrepresentations, too often blasphemy. So none of the great world teachers ever started a religion. They all came to tell us the same thing, to awaken to our true nature, to what we truly are. It was people that started religions because they could not follow these high moral ideals, so they had to make them into rituals and dogmas and rules and regulations, and try to force their opinions on other people, as we know, often by very violent ways. And it still goes on nowadays, unfortunately. Religions that promote separateness and intolerance have drifted a long way from the inspiration of the one who initiated it, even though they never intended to found a religion. They just came to help us to awaken to our true nature and live under the guidance of our higher divine self. HPB again writes, and I like this one, it is not violence that can ever ensure bread and comfort for all, nor is the kingdom of peace and love, of mutual help and charity and food for all, to be conquered by a cold, reasoning, diplomatic policy. It is only by the close brotherly union of men's and women's, of course, selves, of soul solidarity, of the growth and development of that feeling which makes one suffer when one thinks of the suffering of others, that the reign of justice and equality for all can ever be inaugurated. This is the first of the three fundamental objects for which the Theosophical Society was established and called the Universal Brotherhood of Man, without distinction of race, colour, or creed, as it says here, and sex as well. So that's very beautiful. Not violence can ever ensure bread and comfort for all. And yet, some people think it is. They think that by using violence and revolution that they can bring about peace. But of course not. It can't be. Violence only breeds violence. By sending out hateful thoughts, we just increase hatred in those we send the thoughts to. You know, if we have someone we don't agree with in the world and we send them angry thoughts and hateful thoughts, they're just attaching those thoughts to them and making them more hateful and more angry. So, as Jesus said, love your enemies, bless those that curse you, pray for those that despitefully use you. You know, be sons of your Father which is in heaven, or the divine self. Cease by hatred. Hatred only ceases by love. This is the eternal law. It's by applying the opposite. Overcome the greedy by liberality, the liar by truth, etc. The evil by goodness. Always applying the opposite. Buddhism is the most peaceful of all religions, of course, and there are many schools of Buddhism, some of them devotional, and some, like Zen, teaching us to leave images and words behind. And I've always been very much attracted to Zen. I was into Zen before I came to Theosophy. Theosophy seems to be more attracted to Tibetan Buddhism, but I found this to be too much based upon images and rituals, at least in an outer sense. Obviously, the esoteric side isn't. Chan Buddhism was introduced to China by the Indian monk Bodhidharma, who I mentioned earlier. Buddhism was already there, but not the Chan or Zen type. Bodhidharma met the Emperor Wu, who told him that he had built Buddhist temples and translated scriptures from Indian into Chinese. Wu asked Bodhidharma what his merit would be for doing this, and Bodhidharma replied, "None whatsoever." He was saying that just by doing external things like that, it doesn't necessarily make one more spiritual. And also boasting just boosts the ego, which we're trying to transcend. Now, I tend to think that probably doing those things would be very useful in some ways, but it doesn't. It wasn't what Bodhidharma was trying to get at. So Chan Buddhism moved into Japan, and there it became Zen. Zen has become the basis for poetry, art, music, and the construction of gardens and temples in Japan, particularly in somewhere like Kyoto, as well as a spiritual way of life. It belongs to the Mahayana school, which means the great vehicle, because it is concerned with the enlightenment of humanity, whereas the Hinayana, or small vehicle, also known as the Theravada, is a path that teaches, a path suited to the individual. In both cases, meditation is of great importance. And the interesting thing is, in the Lotus Sutra, it said that the Mahayana and the Hinayana were just preparatory for the Ekayana, which is the one vehicle, which merges the two into one and transcends both. So that's very interesting. It's a very deep teaching, very deep indeed. Bodhidharma says that the mind is Buddha. Our nature is mind, and the mind is our nature. This nature is the same as the mind of all Buddhas. Buddhas of the past and future only transmit this mind. Beyond this mind, there's no Buddha anywhere. But deluded people don't realize that their own mind is a Buddha. They keep searching outside. They never stop invoking Buddhas or worshipping Buddhas and wondering, where is the Buddha? Don't indulge in such illusions. Just know your mind. Beyond your mind, there's no other Buddha. The sutras say, everything that has form is an illusion. They also say, wherever you are, there's a Buddha. Your mind is the Buddha. Don't use a Buddha to worship a Buddha. It's just quite an interesting little sentence. It means that that we are already. I think the Zen master Bankei says it's no point in trying to become a Buddha. We just have to try to remain a Buddha because we're already there. And the mind is the key to everything, as HPB says. It's the battleground is the mind that drags us down or raises us up. Remember the words from the voice of the silence. Look inward, thou art Buddha. Again, not you'll become Buddha. Thou art Buddha. We are Buddha. So Bodhidharma is saying that the journey is an inner one. The mind is the key. In one sense, it is the great slayer of the real. But if it becomes illumined by the light of the spirit, it is the gateway to enlightenment. It's what is known in philosophy, and HPB mentions it as Manasa Tajasa, which means the enlightened mind, the illumined mind. So the real heart of Buddhism is is compassion, the desire to end suffering. And that is the reason that the Buddha started on his journey. He saw suffering in the four sights and also the holy man, who was so serene and calm. And he knew then There was a way to end suffering, and he was determined to find it. It's a very compassionate act. And he mentions in the Lotus Sutra one of his previous incarnations when he was known as the Bodhisattva, never despise. I think many people would have heard me mention the Bodhisattva never despise before, because the Bodhisattva never despise lived in a time when the teachings were degenerate and people would mock him. They would physically attack him, mentally attack him, abuse him. But he'd always get up, look them in the face and say, I cannot despise you because you will all be Buddhas someday. You could see the divine in them, the fact that they would, he'd preach in previous lives, and in future lives, they would become Buddha. And even he, in a previous life, may have been the same as them. So it's always looking for the divine in others, for the goodness in another person, for the divine. Trying to find it, because inwardly we're all one. Let's face it, we're all one. We have the same spirit. We're united by the same spirit. And that's how we come together, by looking for the divine in others, slowly but surely coming together, awakening, becoming more aware of who and what we are in essence. In the Theosophical glossary, HP Blavatsky writes about karma. Now, I'm not talking about karma, K-A-R-M-A, I'm talking about karma, K-A-M-A, which we think of as desire, as in the Kama Sutra, of course. But she gives another definition about the word before the concept became degraded. She says, karma is the first conscious, all-embracing desire for universal good, love, and for all that lives and feels, needs help and kindness. The first feeling of infinite, tender compassion and mercy that arose in the consciousness of the one creative force as soon as it came into life and being as a ray from the Absolute. Karma is preeminently the divine desire of creating happiness and love. So that's a lot different the way we think of karma as being desire. It's a very beautiful little saying. I'll just read some of it again because it's so beautiful. Karma is the first conscious, all-embracing desire for universal good, love, and for all that lives and feels, needs help and kindness. The first feeling of infinite tender compassion and mercy that arose in the consciousness of the creative one force as soon as it came into life and being as a ray from the Absolute. Karma is preeminently the divine desire of creating happiness and love. So that should be what we should all be trying to do, to create happiness and love, because we all have that within us, the power to do that within us. I always say we have the power of the Trimurti. We have the power of Brahma to bring something into being, the power of Vishnu to keep it as long as it's useful to us, but also the power of Shiva to dissolve it and to regenerate when we feel that it's no longer useful to us and move on to a higher state of being. I think that's the esoteric meaning of the Trimurti as regards us, as above, so below. A Zen saying is, no mud, no lotus. So we have to use life's experiences, seemingly good or bad, to help us on our way. It's all a matter of having the right attitude to life and its ups and downs, and growing in the light of the spiritual sun that is shining in each one of us behind our often misty minds. More misty than mystic, it seems sometimes. Thich Nhat Hanh, who I absolutely love, Thich Nhat Hanh, he's the Vietnamese Zen teacher, made a statement that we should all regard ourselves as flowers and that we grow by being watered with love. We grow in spirit by being watered by love. To me, that's true flower power. That's what I think of as true flower power. So this seemingly simple statement has a profound meaning and is typical of the totally practical advice that Thich Nhat Hanh gave out. Nothing technical to baffle the mind. just straight to the point. No one who truly follows the teachings of the Buddha would ever entertain the use of violence. The fact is that most people have drifted away from any real belief in their religions and give just lip service to what is written in their scriptures. They become protective towards this counterfeit religion and oppose any other ways of thought, and this leads to violence. So Christianity becomes a sort of anti-Christianity, and the same may be applied to Islam. Buddhism, in essence, is the most peaceful of religions, but still has its limitations in an exoteric sense. One of the verses that I really love from the Voice of the Silence, and it's really beautiful, are the following. Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself has wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning human tear drop on thy heart, and there remain, nor ever brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed. So to me, that is the essence of Buddhist teaching, of the compassion and love of Buddha. And I can't imagine any more beautiful words being written than that. We can, of course, admire such words, but they're meant to awaken in us a certain experience, not just remain beautiful words on paper to discuss intellectually. In his book, The Buddha of Infinite Light, D.T. Suzuki explains the teachings of the Shin school of Buddhism in Japan. He writes about a certain class of devotees named Mayokonin. Mayo means wonderful, ko means fragrance, and nin means person, signifying someone who manifests the wonderful fragrance of spirituality. These people are not intellectual, but are sincere, kind-hearted, and compassionate. There was one man who learned that a temple in Kyoto, 200 miles away, was on fire. It was once a temple he attended and was very close to his heart. So he took a large carpet, soaked it in water, and shook it in the direction of the temple. Now, to our minds, this was rather a pointless act and seems very foolish. But he was motivated by compassion and was spontaneously led to do something. He knew he had to do something. He was 200 miles away. He couldn't do anything to help put the fire out in a physical way. But he had to do something because he was motivated by his compassion within his heart. And this kind of act transcends logical reasoning, which is difficult for us to understand. As I said, it was a spontaneous reaction. So the heart of Buddhist teaching then is an awakening to our true being, realizing that beyond the Maya or illusion of life, we live in a transcendental divine life. Bankei, the Japanese Zen teacher, calls it the unborn Buddha mind. And as I've said earlier, says that we don't need to become Buddhas. We just have to remain Buddhas. It was him who once was giving a sermon, and he walked onto the platform and a bird sang outside, and he said, that bird has said everything. He just walked off the platform. And that's what it's all about. Sermons that can be preached by stones, as Master KH once said. So HBB points out that Buddhism is the closest religion to the truth. But Theosophy is different because it points to the essence of all religions, not just one. There's no religion higher than truth. Still, we can learn so much about gentleness, compassion, and love from experiencing the heart of Buddhist teaching. So thank you very much for listening.